Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. It's a beautiful sunny evening. I'm sure there were other things you could have been doing, so it's really good to see you here. I'm Julian Saunders. I'm a town councillor, and I've been the chair of our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan group. For the rest of the evening, we're probably going to talk about that as the LCWIP. So that's the cycling and walking infrastructure plan. I'm also a Swale councillor, and I'm the chair of the Environment Committee at Swale, which does cover active travel now. That may not be so relevant to this session, but I think it's worth you knowing. Adrian Berendt is a consultant who's been working with the town council for a couple of years now, firstly helping us consult on the 20-mile-an-hour scheme, and latterly helping us with the development of the LCWIP. But as well as being a consultant, he's also a very dedicated campaigner for 20-mile-an-hour schemes and for improving cycling and walking. So the pattern of the session, and we're probably going to run for about an hour and a half, is that Adrian is going to do an introduction. He's going to talk a bit about what the town council's been doing in relation to cycling and walking in the last 3 years. He's going to talk a bit about the national policy picture and what's driving the things that we're doing. And he's going to finish up by talking about some of the things that we might move on and do later. And after we've done that, because this session is really the kick-off of a consultation about our LCWIP, we are going to very much throw things open for discussion, contributions, as well as questions as well. So please, if you've got views or you've got information to share, do be ready to speak. Couple of other things I'll just say by way of introduction. This is part of our Cycle Fest, and probably a lot of you are particularly interested in cycling. For those of you who are pedestrians, the LCWIP is quite focused on the needs of pedestrians, but it may well be that we end up talking a lot about cycling this evening. And the final thing I'll say by way of introduction is that Adrian is going to say what he thinks. It's not necessarily the view of the town council. And some of these things we would need to work through, and anything that we do, as you'll know, is very hedged in by having to consult with the public and get the agreement of people like KCC, the Highways Authority. So over to you, Adrian. And yeah, I'll let you carry on.
So I was just saying that if I'm going too fast, shout. If I'm going too slowly, also shout. I'm aware that there's lots of people who've got different levels of understanding here. So please, and if you need to interrupt, please just stick your hand up. I'll try and answer questions as we go through. I'm just going to go through the first few slides quite quickly, because I think a number of you will know what's going on. Right. And this is outlined as Julie said. So let's talk about the project origins. First of all, Louise. This really started when 2020, so people were very concerned about some casualties which had happened in Faversham, and a 2020 group was started. Go on to the next group. But the concerns were originally about one or two places, one or two crossings, and then Tim and some colleagues in Faversham worked on what they call a red dot map to identify where people felt in danger. And unsurprisingly, it was across the town. It wasn't just in one or two places. And as a result of that work, we've got a 20-mile-an-hour scheme in Faversham. This was originally funded out of the Kent, Kent Active Travel managed to get some funding from the DFT for the emergency as part of COVID, and we managed to get 20 miles an hour funded out of that. The scheme design was fairly basic because it needs to go in quickly. So we know that there are various aspects of the 20 mile an hour scheme which is not yet working as well as it could do. There was lots more, can I just go back one? There were lots more things planned for the scheme that have actually gone in the first instance. So there was more traffic calming intended than could be got in the first instance. So next slide. So we, as part of the 20 mile an hour implementation, KCC did a consultation on pros and cons of it, and that was all fine. There was about 2/3 majority of supporting it. But at the same time, with the town council, we ran a consultation on how people also felt about the town in terms of what was safe, what was unsafe, how it would help, how it would be better, easier for them to walk and cycle and so on. Really focused around this idea of making Faversham healthier, safer and cleaner. And people were asked to put dots on maps, rather like the original red dot map, but an electronic version where they felt things were dangerous and where the sorts of possible interventions. Next slide. And there was overwhelming support for better walking and cycling. So we can see how the scheme for 20 miles an hour, which was originally particularly about pedestrian safety, has morphed slowly but surely into measures for cycling and walking. Next slide, please. Let me go back nationally, and this was, you'll appreciate I did these slides about 48 hours ago. Things might have changed in the last I don't know. I'm rather hoping that they haven't, for the negative. I'm hoping that the government's walking and cycling agenda is actually now fairly well embedded in lots of places within the government. Britain used to lead the world in making bikes and in using bikes, and something like 25 billion vehicle kilometres were being cycled in 1949, and you can see how it fell off a cliff year by year up to about 1970, and then it was really so low that it could hardly fall any further. In the last year or two, we have seen a definite uptick, partly COVID, and partly because people are realising the benefits of cycling in particular, and partly because the infrastructure is now starting to be built. I bet a lot of those miles are in London, where there's heavy-duty infrastructure been implemented already. Next slide, please. I've shown this slide because I think it's quite interesting, because people always talk about how the Netherlands people always cycle there and it's flat and blah blah blah. Actually, the top line is the Netherlands and the bottom line is the UK, and you'll see that they followed a pretty similar pattern up until about 1974. And at that point, the Netherlands said, no, we're going to do something different here. Now, it hasn't got back to the levels of the 1950s, but it has at least stabilised and started to be on an upward trend. Whereas in the UK, we've continued to go downwards. So when people tell you, oh, it's the hills or it's the weather or something, the weather has not changed in either of these countries much. It has a bit, I accept that. Topography hasn't changed, you know, and we're the same sort of people. So it is no good saying, oh, it's all different in the Netherlands. There is a difference. The thing that the Netherlands have done is they've committed to raising the number of people cycling, and those are the results. Next slide, please. So the first hint, you can't see what the date is up there, it's a bit of pity, never mind, was in 2016, when the Public Health England produced a pamphlet called Working Together to Promote Active Travel as a briefing for local authorities, and there they were highlighting how the importance of active travel for public health, and we know how important this is, of course. So just next slide, please. This was followed in 2017. It's followed in 2017 by technical guidance from the Department of Transport for cycling and walking. And the first idea about implementing local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. So that's when they laid out the blueprint for what Julian called LCWIPs, or some people call them LCWIPs, amusingly enough, for local authorities to actually implement proper cycling plans. And they issued 3 years later a design guidance about how it's called amusingly entitled LTN 120 in the trade. So if you hear people talk about LTN 120, that's what that's all about, which is basically how do you design cycle routes. And you'll see, you might have seen some of you will see in the exhibition, you'll see the thing called the good, the bad, and the ugly, with all the stuff designed before 2020, not all, but quite a lot of it was the bad and the ugly. And now the cycling infrastructure design guide is actually telling you how to design well. Next slide. And that was accompanied by a very notable document called Gear Change in 2020, when the government set out its objectives for cycling and walking, called it a bold vision. Actually, it is a bold vision because it's completely different from anything that had been published beforehand. Next slide, please. And at the same time, they promised, it says 2.5, it was actually 2 billion promised. It was originally 2.5 and then they changed it to 2 billion for over a 5-year period that local authorities could apply for to implement cycling infrastructure. It sounds an awful lot of money. When you divide it by the number of people, actually it's not a huge amount. To give you a feel, the Dutch have been spending about $20 a head for about the last 40 years. We're now spending about £5 or £6 a head, but it's better than £1 a head, so it is an improvement, but not perfect. In the gear change 1 year on, which is just about a year ago, the government reiterated its commitment to cycling. So this wasn't just an announcement and we're not going to do anything about it. They've reiterated the importance of getting people on walking and cycling, and they gave various targets for doing that. So you'll recall that Faversham got something out of tranche 1 which it used to implement 20 miles an hour. Out of tranche 2, Kent did okay. It was sort of, in the top third of allocations per head. You can see it's about £4 a head, which again is not a lot, but it's better than nothing. Unfortunately, Faversham didn't get anything out of that because it had got stuff in the first tranche. Next slide, please. Now we come through to this year, and in 2022, in January, you'll recall that the government issued some guidance around the highway code changes, and it gave more priority. It said a hierarchy of responsibility with people taking the most responsibility, those who are creating the most risk, i.e. the people in the biggest, fastest cars and lorries and so on. And they need to take more care of those who are walking and cycling because they're more vulnerable. They also issued stuff around. I haven't got the key thing here. It doesn't matter. They talked about position, about why people cycle in the lane as opposed to in the gutter and all that sort of thing. And they talk about how you should overtake cyclists using at least 1.5 meters and so on. They issued. They confirmed actually. This is. I always thought this is what you had to do. That you should give way to people crossing the junctions. And basically the rules changed so that anybody who's going straight ahead has priority over anybody turning. What this means for cycling is that you can now, instead of having to stop like you do on Bisingwood Road at every junction, you can now have the cycling designed to go straight across the junction. That now gives priority to the cyclists going straight ahead. So the highway code before actually sort of didn't allow you. You had to say stop at this junction because the road's got priority, the people on the road have priority. Now it's the cyclists will have priority. So that highway code is really important. Yes, please. At the same time, the Active Travel England agency was launched. Chris Boardman is the head, and there's a very, very good cycling designer called Brian Deegan, who was previously working for Chris up in Manchester. Before that, he was with TfL. and he's the chief inspector. So they've started to put the money where the mouth is. There's 100 people going to be recruited for Active Travel England, working on these active travel schemes, and they will be the agency which decides who spends, how to allocate funds to the local authorities. Next slide, please. Really importantly, on the 1st of April, don't laugh, this year, DfT re-announced how they wanted road space reallocated. It is not enough to say, oh, well, we'll just let cyclists mingle with HGVs and so on. No, we have to reallocate road space away from motor cars to people walking or cycling. And that is a requirement of funding. So if we want funding for this, we've got to make more space for people who are walking and cycling. It also talked, it also did talk about how 25-mile speed limits were also fundable, which is good. Next slide. Up to the minute, not quite up to the minute, yesterday, CWIS 2, I should have mentioned CWIS 1, that's the cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which was I think it was 2017, came out with the technical guidance. They've just released cycling walking investment strategy number 2, which came out yesterday, and there's commitments to modal shift, so more people walking and cycling, particularly for the shorter journeys. There's also a very, can I just go for the next? Yes, there's a very important thing here that a lot of local authorities do local transport plans. So what are we going to do in our county about getting people around and how they're going to travel? Those are voluntary at the moment. The government is about to make these mandatory. And that mandation will include what are you doing about carbon reduction? What are you doing about having a local cycling and walking plan for the whole county? And what are you doing about your bus strategy? So it will mandate those 3 things. It will then updated guidance on the development and delivery of local transport plans will be published later in 2022 and will align with local cycling and walking plans. Now, if you translate that, what that means is if you're not doing stuff for active travel, you're not going to get stuff for highways either. So the danger here for councils is if they don't engage, if they decide we can't be bothered with cycling and walking, we'll just put all our money into cars, they won't get funding from DfT for that either. So that is something which councils really need to think about, because they're not those who go to the next slide. The next slide, yes. Kent did not do well out of the most recent trials. It's right down here at the bottom side. There are a number of councils actually who did even worse. They didn't get anything at all. There's about 29 councils who didn't get anything. There's about 4 or 5 who got a lot, which I've excluded because they just take the graph up here. Gloucestershire got 13 million for one cycleway between Cheltenham and Gloucester, and there were 1 or 2 others who did really, really well. But Kent, as you can see, has got very little. It's got enough for 2 schemes, a small one in Herne Bay and one in Sevenoaks. And part of the reason we believe is because the authority hasn't been ambitious enough in what it's trying to do. It is not reallocating road space in the way that the DfT is asking it to do. And the danger for that is that when it comes to actually funding the local transport stuff, all of the other stuff which we want, dual gauge roads or roundabouts or whatever, it's going to be linked to this funding as well. So there's a grave danger to that. Next slide, please. These are the 2 schemes that Kent has done. Next slide, please. So can I just go back 1 or... No, okay, fine, just carry on. They've allocated, the next slide. Yes, so the active travel fund allocations for this year, for the whole country, total £200 million. So great, really sounds really good. Hampshire, on the roundabout, one round about 80 million quid. So I've looked at the Transport for South East Strategic Investment Plan. For Kent, they're talking about 19.4 billion of investment for transport. It's over 27 years, so it's not quite as much as you think, but it's a big sum. For active travel, out of 19.4 billion, active travel, 100 million. Less than 1%. So something needs to change, because we're not going to deliver what the government targets are around modal shift unless we actually reallocate the roads. I mean, next slide, please. 80 billion for one tunnel, or 2 tunnels. Think what this is going to do to our carbon footprint. It's, we're on the wrong track for doing this stuff. We have to change the way we're thinking about this, and I'm afraid it's going to be down to all of us. We are going to have to drive less. That's the only way we're going to meet our carbon reduction targets. Next chart. So, sorry, can I go just back? No, carry on. Okay, sorry. Interestingly, there are local authorities around the country who have recognised the need for traffic reduction. And they're saying that the only way we're going to achieve our electric vehicles are not going to save us. The only way we're going to save is by particularly short journeys, walking and cycling. Next slide. There is a thing called We Are Possible, who are promoting a car-free July, and I know there's some people who are doing this. I'm trying to do it, but I couldn't do it. I had to drive down to Faversham, I'm afraid. But this is the sort of initiative which people are thinking about now. So I think it is starting to get into the cycle. Can I possibly not use my car for this journey? Not every journey, because there are clearly journeys we need to make by car, but there are some things. Carry on, yes. The Welsh Government, it has suspended all future road building plans. The Welsh Government is probably the most advanced of the 4 nations in the UK now, and there are no new roads in Wales at the moment. And I mentioned the LTP, Local Transport Plan, and Kent's Local Transport Plan 5 is in the works. It's not ready yet, but it is coming. It will have to talk about carbon reduction. It will have to talk about bus strategy. It will have to talk about county-wide LCWIPs. Otherwise, we're not going to get the money for the other stuff. That's what we can't. That's what the financial strains are going to be, and that's going to come in probably in a couple of years' time. So, where are we actually travelling in Kent? Next slide, please. Kent County Council actually, from a technical perspective, are doing a good job. They've set up, they've linked up the road safety and the active travel together. So we've now got a new department, which is next slide, please, which is going to have more resources within Kent, actually designing the stuff and helping making behaviour change and introducing school streets and so on, and continuing to do the great work that's been going on bikeability and getting people walking to school. So at a technical level, Kent is certainly doing its best to try and being able to deliver this stuff. That's really good. They're busily recruiting at the moment. My concern is whether we get the funding, and that requires a change of political will here in KCC to actually say we are going to embrace this stuff and we're really going to go for it. That's the. I mean, we can talk later on about what the barriers are to these things, but certainly the ability to deliver technically is one thing. But the political will, the political support for this stuff is absolutely critical. Next slide, please. So this is something that's been wildly successful in Tunbridge Wells, where I live. There was a lot of opposition to this when it was first thought about the school street. So it's basically closed at either end for the duration of the pickup and drop off of children. And what they found out, this is the picture now. I remember what the street was like. This was just cars going up and down, people just jump outside the school street, out to jump. It has now changed the way that parents interact with teachers and with with children. They're now coming and talking to each other. There are more people walking. It's actually just changing the community. And this is what these are the sorts of things we need to do. These are the sort of little things which cost very little to do, but can be nudge factors. Next slide, please. So LCWIP, where are we? So this was the process we went through very quickly. Just determine the scope, what you do in any normal project. Just work out what you want to do and just go through and do an audit on what you've got, on the assets you've got, and then work out what you want to change. Next slide, please. And this we looked at the scope of the LCWIP, and basically it's the town centre, the Faversham Town Council border, plus a few bits includes Orr and includes some of Borton, and I think Selling Parish Council is a corner here, I think. So that was the scope of the LCWIP. So it's basically the town plus the new developments, existing settlement plus new development. Next slide, please. And you'll recall that we did this survey asking people what they thought. So this was trying to gather the information about what was wrong with the town already, and how things could be made better. And you could talk about speeding vehicles and people feeling unsafe and so on, and how to slow down the traffic. Significantly, lots of people talked about adding pedestrian crossings and more cycle lanes. We could talk about cycle lanes where we could put them in a minute, but that may be more an issue. And actually, quite a number of people mentioned fewer motor vehicles, which is interesting. So doing something like the hire car, which you've got here, great idea, because that will take motor vehicles off the road. Because people will be able to ditch their second or their third car and use a hire car instead. The responses we got apart from Whitstable Road and the A2, where there's a lot of concerns at Brighton Road, the concerns are spread across the town, as we saw from the earlier map. So that was for what we were doing, gathering the information. Next slide, please. And then we did a rough idea of what the network plan might be for both cycling and walking, and as you'd expect, it sort of follows the existing street pattern, because that's where people want, that's where people like to cycle and walk anyway. Next slide, please. And what we did then is we went and audited this. So we did it for cycling and we did it for walking, and Maria helped on walking audits. I can't recognize anybody else who helped with walking, but and basically we're just looking. There were 20 categories for walking of what the route looked like, and you could grade it in terms of sort of, maintenance. Was the footway well maintained? Yes, it was. It gets 2. It's okay, but it's not great. 1, it's absolutely hopeless, littering and all sorts of stuff. Then you get a 0. And there were 20 of these around all sorts of aspects of the walk. So if it was perfect, you'd get 40. And an average score, an acceptable score, this is the DFT, Department for Transport methodology, is 28, so 70%. So if it's 70%, it's pretty good. I can't remember what we scored, but it was sort of, we used those results to help inform the sorts of interventions which we were going to make. Next slide. And then we have to prioritise the interventions. This is sort of where we're getting to. And the things we wanted to think about was making sure that anything we did would help reinforce 20-mile-an-hour compliance. Also make sure that what we were doing was likely to be funded by the DFT, because that's where the big money is. So we need to link in what the DFT wants and what actually Travel England wants to the LCWIP. We did apply to be a mini Holland, which we haven't got the money for. This also linked to this is not just in the town, but linking up the town to the parishes, and in the longer term to up to Canterbury and up to Sittingbourne. So we have an interurban network as well for cycling. We thought about whether do we want to do lots of little interventions or one or two big things, and we've got, you'll see on the list is actually both. Do we want to focus on having crossings, for example, types of intervention, or do we want to just make it accessible for all through drop curbs and tactiles and so on? And then also making sure that we were benefiting different parts of the town, but actually those parts of the town which probably needed, which have the most need. Next slide, please. And those of you who have seen the exhibition will see there's a little map we've drawn up with all the different types of interventions. And these ones in green, for example, those are about crossings of different roads. The orange things here, that's about where 20 miles an hour might be extended. The yellow ones, I think, where we want to improve a junction to make it easier for people to cross and that sort of thing. So that's all in the LCWIP. Next slide, please. And I talked about the parish to town network. So that's sort of the next stage of this, is to try and link up, making sure we've got a proper network so that people in the villages have a choice other than to jump in their car for every single journey. So those people live in town can actually cycle into the town without having the fear of being mown down on Lower Road. Next slide, please. And I said in the longer term, actually building a network which goes from Sittingbourne through Faversham out to Canterbury, off to Whitstable, and in the longer term, actually, particularly with e-bikes, Lenham and Ashford are not too far. You could get there pretty quickly on an e-bike, and e-bikes are going to be a game changer, I think, for active travel in this county and the country. Next slide, please. And just remember, as I said earlier, the Netherlands wasn't like the Netherlands. It used to be just like every town and city in the UK, car parks basically everywhere. And now, look, which would we prefer? These are people enjoying themselves. These people have walked or cycled into the town, and they'll be spending money, benefiting the economy. This is just creating pollution and congestion. So if anybody tells you, yes, but we're not like the Netherlands, no, neither is the Netherlands either. Next slide, please. Is plenty of space. There is plenty of space. It's just how we choose to use it. If we choose to fill it up with cars, there won't be space for walking and cycling. If we decide to allocate, I can tell you what the numbers are if you like about how many people you can move using bikes rather than cars, but it's 7 times the number of people. So next slide, please. And actually, there is a space if you choose to look at it. It's different things in different places, but this was Lea Bridge Road, where people said you could never get a bike lane on there. And look at this. This was what the bike lane used to look like. I mean, that's exactly how people that's exactly how cyclists get crushed, because it doesn't look like anything. What are you doing there? This is what it looks like now. I think this is actually a CGI image, but it does look like that now. And it just looks so much better. That's something that an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old will cycle along. Next slide, please. And as a result, the cycling in Waltham Forest, which is where Lea Bridge Road is, has gone up. You can see that every year it is now every month is much higher in 21 than it was in 20, 22 than it was in 21, and again higher than 2020. So the only difference is that places like Waltham Forest have actually committed to this stuff, and that is the result. So you see, it's more than doubled, and it's trebled. In March, they were averaging 400 cyclists. I don't know what the scale is. It'll be in a certain place. It's now 1,200 instead of 400. So it's just extraordinary the change that you can make almost instantly. And if you've ever walked across Blackfriars Bridge, you'll see what the results are of building cycling infrastructure. Next. This was a mock-up was done by a friend of mine. How Tunbridge Brook Street could look like with the cycle routes. The cycle route there is horrible at the moment. It looks exactly like Bisley Road, by the way. So it goes in and out and across the road and up and down, and it's hopeless. This is how it could look. There's plenty of space there. Next. This was done by an image by David Orr from Canterbury, who this is the Ridings. I think it's the Ridings roundabout. Is it Riding Gate or Riding? Can't remember. That's what it looks like now. And that's what he imagined it could look like with proper cycling infrastructure. Just so much nicer, just so much more friendly for people, for pedestrians to cross and for cyclists. So that's the interaction there. That's why the infrastructure will help cyclists and walkers. I was down there just a couple of weeks ago, and I was cycling around here. This is just ghastly, and I'm an experienced cyclist, so I sort of know what I'm doing, sort of. Next slide, please. These are the sorts of things which we're thinking about in Faversham. So improving the crosstown walking route, making sure that you can go across Newton Road and St Mary's Road and so on. There is, I think the funding is now available, isn't it, to tighten up the junction at Forbes Road and Athelston
Yeah, I think
Road.
PCC's allocated.
So that's great. That's going ahead, and so the junction will be narrowed, so people can't swoop around that junction and mow pedestrians down as they cross here. And the zebra is going to be slightly resighted, improved, so it just feels like a better place for pedestrians. Next slide, please. And then this is Newton Road, yes. And it happens that Google has got all these people trying to cross the road here. You know, just that is what it's like. So that I think is going to be quite a top priority for the town council to fund that, to make that a proper walking route, and that will help make sure people slow down on Newton Road as well. Next slide, please. Thanks to Tim for this image. You might have seen this in the exhibition. This is how the Mall and down the approach down to station might look. And it changes it from looking like a road where you want to drive fast and just get to where you're going to, oh, I see, there might be pedestrians here, there's a zebra crossing, you know, and the road surface changes. And you could introduce some benches there, you know, and maybe plant a few more trees and some cycle racks and so on, to just make it feel like a place welcome to pedestrians and to cyclists. Next slide.
Cobbles aren't very inviting to cyclists.
Sorry?
Those cobbles aren't very inviting to.
Well, that's a good point. No, you're right. You're right. So we need to flatten it. You're right. Exactly. And no acknowledgement is necessary here, because this is all my own work, and as you can see, it's bloody hopeless. But it just does indicate. It just does sort of give an indication. At the moment, I've walked up to Reading President Barn Hill Road. Was it Bramble Hill Road? You know, and it's just sort of massive tarmac. It just looks ghastly. And actually, it could look quite nice with some benches and a few trees, you know, and just narrowing the road down. And these places could look so much nicer if they're like that, and it would slow the traffic, and so people would just take more care. So I apologise about the amateurness of that. Next slide, please. Right, the most important bit. Where next? I guessed. This was before I spoke to you. I guessed, doing some work in reverse, out of the original 2 billion, I thought the next tranche of money, which is going to be for 3 years, is going to be 550 million. That was my guess. So it's not, I'm not far off. I'm not far off. That is going to be announced very soon, probably September, August, September will be the announcement about what would you like to bid for. We've then probably got 3 months in which to work out what schemes we want here in Kent, here in Faversham, or wherever. And then the announcement of the allocation will happen next year. So that is the big prize, because that, as you can see, it's about the same amount as been allocated in time in the first 3 tranches, which is going to be probably for 2 or 3 years. There might be a 1-year settlement, annoyingly, but in the interim, but probably it's going to be for 3 years. So now is the time when we need to decide exactly what we're going to bid for, and make sure that we can that we get a good share. Next slide, please. And again, in the exhibition, you'll have seen these multicolour priorities. And this is the sort of the penultimate stage of what we were doing, penultimate and last stage of the LCWIP, is to prioritise and integrate the plans. And we've come up with a sort of initial hit list of things which we think are pretty easy and quick to do and will bring lots of benefit. The yellows are those things which will take a bit more work, and they depend really on getting funding from some source, either the Active Travel Fund or elsewhere. And then we've got some amber and red projects, which will be medium and maybe grandiose projects like replacing the long bridge or or redesigning the station, the entrance of the station, so it actually feels a welcoming. Faversham is welcoming you visitors off the train, as opposed to it just being really rather horrible at the moment. Sorry, that's my. I said I was. It is just actually just ghastly, and this is the sort of thing where it'd be really good to get feedback as have we got this right? Are there missing pieces which we haven't got in, and how can we reprioritise stuff? Next slide, please. Yes, so these are the priority ones. The yellow, looks like yellow for me, it was actually green. Priority 2s were, they're the yellow ones, priority 3s. Oh, that's it, right. And finally, this is what we need. This is what we need. This is what's going on, I think, in, is this in Hackney? I can't remember. Anyway, basically, just be wilding parking spaces into parks. And isn't that lovely? So there we are.
It's been very well, Adrian.
Was that was about 38 minutes, which
very well.
Which was sorry. And if yes, let's.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered a whole number of bases there, which have given us quite a few challenges. I thought what we might do, because we've got about 45 minutes, is just to start with. Adrian covered a lot of things there. So I thought to start with, maybe if people had questions, if they wanted to clarify things that were said, we could deal with those first, and then we'll open it up for a bit more of a discussion about cycling and walking in Faversham and what we might do next. So are there any questions about what Adrian said, or the things that you weren't certain about? Yeah.
Before you ask your question, could you introduce yourself so that everybody else knows?
Yes, my name is Mike Moss. I'm a resident of Faversham. It's only thought we're given to the opening of what are now trackways not accessible to cyclists. For example, the cycleway or the walkway past the old girls' school, the cross town path, for example, which are currently barred to cyclists, despite the fact that many cyclists use the name.
Can I pass that?
You can do.
It's more of a political question, I think.
I think I'll make some general comments. I think historically, if you go back 10 years, there was quite, in national policy, there was quite a strong feeling about having sharing spaces like that and encouraging joint use by cyclists and pedestrians. I think that the feeling now, and increasingly in government documents, is to not have so much sharing, because it often isn't comfortable and easy for either cyclists or pedestrians, and to try and get more cycling on the roads, and to try and take away space from cars, if anything, and create more for cyclists. But at the same time, there are still examples of shared space. So I think technically the walkway on the other side of the A2 in front of the Abbey School, I think that was just about sufficient width for KCC to feel that was something that people could cycle along as well as walk along. But I mean, there are people here who are far more technically expert than me on this, but I think the trend is away from that sharing, and it's more towards giving pedestrians the freedom of those spaces and encouraging cyclists to use roads. And that within the LCWIP, there's quite a lot of emphasis on trying to make it easier all the time for people to cycle on the road by slowing the traffic. But we'll come back. We can come back and debate these things, because they're a debate. Yeah.
I'll wait for the debate.
Okay. Are there any other clarifications that people want? Rich,
Hi,
introduce yourself.
Rich Lehman, KCC, Swale East, and resident of Faversham. I am curious about the funding. We mentioned that there's this next tranche of funding coming available in a couple of months' time. does Faversham Town Council bid directly to government for that, or are all bids filtered through KCC, or is it coming through Swell Borough Council?
So the money will be allocated to the Highways Authority,
Yeah,
which is KCC.
yeah,
There is and so it will be KCC which will send a bid in to DFT or Active Travel England. I'm not quite sure exactly where the route is now, but we one or the other. But it does need local support. So the schemes need to be designed locally,
yeah.
and then be filtered up through KCC. Is that enough? Do you want to say any more on that?
Could you introduce? Sorry, could you introduce yourself, Adrian, if you before you come in? Yeah.
Adrian, active travel coordinator for Swell Borough Council. All residents. I think, Rich, the issue is that we've got to compete at county level, and if we're successful, then we're going to compete at national level.
I was just curious because I was in a meeting earlier today, funny enough, about youth investment fund with an officer at KCC, and they said about how for some of the government things, people put in bids directly rather than it going through KCC. But I guess with highways related stuff, it would make sense that it's all filtered through the Highways Authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A specific question was asked of DFT this week about whether in a two-tier system, whether borough district councils could apply directly. The answer is no.
Okay.
So,
The only caveats around this are that the local plan and the transport infrastructure is tightly tied. And clearly the local plans are being done at district or borough level, and the transport stuff is done at KCC level. So it absolutely needs to come from the district or borough or the town, but it needs to be coordinated at KCC level. We have not got a good answer from the DFT or Active Travel England about why Kent did so badly in tranche 3. We've had a sort of answer because they've sent it's not exactly, it is a standard letter out to particularly those local authorities who didn't do so well, saying here are the criteria, here's what looks good and here's what looks bad, but they haven't said Faversham, oh, we looked at Faversham scheme and it failed on X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
They haven't said that, but we need to know that.
Yeah.
Because there is no point in just sending the same application in, knowing that it's going to fail again.
Yeah.
Is it because we weren't bold enough? Is it because we had too many things in? Should we have just had one cycle scheme? You know, should we have sent in a bid for 20 million quid to replace the Long Bridge? You know, that's the sort of feedback we need from the DFT and from Active Travel England to say, so what is going to float your boat for this?
And do you think there's any chance that they'll be forthcoming if we keep pressing for that?
I think if either the town or borough or KCC ring up Brian Deegan at Active Travel England and say, boy, we really, really, really want to know. You've got to tell us what schemes work. I mean, I don't know whether he can deliver on that, but that's certainly what we should be at least trying.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to. Adrian, did you just want to
can I just
quickly come in?
to that? There's 3 foundations, stones to getting a funding bid funded, and they are political will, technical capability, and the reallocation of road space. If you've got those 3 things, you are onto a winning bid. If you haven't, and I question whether Kent has all 3 yet, you're not.
Okay.
No pressure, Rich. And there's a sort of 4th, isn't there? That
It's also, you've got to think about social exclusion. Those people who are being forced actually to use a car, and maybe they can't really even afford it. You've got to be giving them alternatives. So there's something around levelling up as well that needs to be in the mix.
Okay, I'm going to.
Is it general?
Yeah, there's currently about 5. So my name's Joel Porter, I live in Abbey Street.
Okay.
There are currently about 5 or 6 housing projects around Faversham, and whether they're being considered in this approach is a current sort of visibility of the project. It doesn't seem they're integrated. They seem to be kind of separate from the plans.
Do you want us to try and
answer
that? I mean, I think there are probably people in the room with more technical knowledge than me about this. As I understand it, I mean, developers come forward with plans, and then they have a dialogue. If it's a big project, they'd have a dialogue with Cllr as the planning authority. And certainly, as in the last 3 years, as Cllr councillors, we've been trying to push up the standards, both in terms of what people build, but also in terms of the active travel infrastructure that's put in place. Quite a lot of the developments that are coming through at the moment were agreed quite a long time ago. So I think you're right, they sometimes don't really cater to active travel. The developments also, developers also have to make what they call Section 106 contributions. Again, people here will know more about this technically. But some of the things that are due to happen, like improvements on Whitstable Road, for example, in terms of crossings, are being funded through developer contributions from those developments that are taking place up on Love Lane. So there is a process, but it needs to get better. And I think we, as a town council, councillors generally, need to probably be a bit sharper in putting pressure on developers to do the right kinds of things. And we've certainly, we're keen to make sure that 20 miles an hour, for example, is there in all developments. But I think there are other people. Tim, did you want to come in?
Well, on this point about how does the new stuff plug in to, I'm Tim Stone, I'm a Faversham resident, but I've also been helping with the 2020 strategy and the LCWIP. How new development plugs into the existing town is really important. And I think it's worth mentioning the neighbourhood plan, because the town council is in parallel to the LCWIP, developing the neighbourhood plan. And if you haven't heard about that or been involved yet, that's because it, I think, hasn't yet come to consultation, but it's coming very soon. And within that, there's a policy proposal on critical junctions. And many of the junctions that have already been identified are ones where they're right outside the new housing development proposals. So, for example, along the A2, where the duchy lands are, if that development were to go ahead, the way people can cross the A2 will make all the difference as to whether they choose to walk or cycle or jump in a car. Equally, there's junctions in town that are also important. So the housing allocations matter, but we've got to get the centre of town right as well, because once you cross the A2, you can't then cross Forbes Road. Why would you bother crossing the A2 in the first place? So I would encourage everyone to stay close to the neighbourhood plan and look for the consultation when it comes forward, and put your views into it, and make sure that the neighbourhood planners have got it right, because that's the next step with all of this. Once it's in the neighbourhood plan, it's got a much better chance, I think, of being funded by development contributions as well as by national government plans.
I tried to where Broadden, it's got a new development that's around Broadden, trying to get from there across. There's two developments, one backing on from where Audi is. They don't seem to meet. So you can cycle through one part of the estate, and you come to a footpath, actually shouldn't be important cycling, but to get towards Audi, it's just a wall of fences. So I end up in the field behind the school. So it kind of didn't seem to sort of connect in some ways. There's two developments building, And you think, well, there must be a logical way across, but actually I've got something else to do in a field.
The entrance into Ham Road, so it's Ham Road development. It's just the worst way of linking new housing into an existing town outside Leamington School, where the roadway is being widened. There's all these hatched white lines that are wasted space. It's harder to cross. I mean, recent development in Faversham have made all the mistakes that these strategies are opening. And I hope that not only do we fix new junctions, we also fix existing ones, even recent ones that have been got wrong. So, but I think it needs the support and pressure from the local community.
I suppose my concern is that you have all these 6 or 7 year developments happening, and the parties in sort of the town to develop this sort of site strategy, and yet they've got more houses and more cars being sort of pushed into the outside. It's not integrated, so that's my concern.
I think that's good, because I think you're moving us on to a discussion and a debate. By way of introduction, can I say the LCWIP we tried to develop fairly rapidly because we wanted to have one for when these bids were going in, and we'd done a lot of consultation through Commonplace during the 20 mile an hour scheme, so we had quite a lot of evidence from the public. But having got it all in place and got it approved by Swale and KCC, we're now at the stage where we want to consult on it and actually get a bit more feedback on whether what's in the LCWIP is what we really need in the town. So this is really a starting point of a consultation which will run for probably until the end of August. You will be able to respond online through the Town Council website, and for the next couple of days we've still got an exhibition across the road, and you can look at the full report and you can fill out a questionnaire. So I'd encourage you to do that. But this meeting this evening is really an opportunity, I think, to give some more general feedback about what you think should happen in relation to cycling and walking in town. So we've already touched on the sharing of alleyways. We've touched on what we might do in new developments. I don't know if people have got other comments that they wanted to make, or things they wanted to raise as part of the discussion.
Is this the right place now to talk about the inter-parish and inter-village issues?
Yeah, very much so.
There are some very underused footpaths that go across the Temple to Graveney. There's a brilliant cycleway that goes along the creek through Stanley Wharf. It's a footpath that cyclists use anyway. So was any thought given to upgrading the public footpath to a public right-of-way? That would certainly encourage people onto Graveley. If the footpath at Graveley is converted to a right-of-way, you'd end up in Seasalts very easily off-road. You know, whether that means, I personally don't think you should surface right-of-way, just take it as it comes, but it's a thought that might be worth considering. And similarly, there's a footpath that goes out from Doddington to Orr, which would be take people off the road with lorries passing them all the time going up to the main lorry path. Is any thought given to converting footpaths to right?
So at the moment, Adrian is now doing some work on a project called Town to Parishes, which is looking at kind of the links from the town to parishes. Do you want to respond to that question?
So I've had an initial go round just to identify what possible needs and demands are in the parishes. The next stage is to look at specific routes and say, yeah, exactly that. Could we use that existing right of way? Does it need resurfacing?
My point is more about the right of ways are fine. It's the footpath that changed by.
And there may well be some of those that could actually be really useful links. And there is sometimes an issue around land ownership and how you actually need to convert from footpath to right of way. But it should certainly be examined, because there are places which could be examined like that. So it'd be good to get, I mean, have your email or something like that. be really good to get your feedback.
Hey, Brian, you wanted to?
Yeah, just,
Would you introduce yourself?
sorry, my job is from Southern Cycleway, to try and hold the development to account so far what's happening on the Great March. I'm a resident of Great, and you made a very good point about how you can upgrade footpaths. So our proposal is to try and upgrade the footpath that currently goes through the Southern Cycleway development, link up Acton to Cllr. So hopefully, what's going to be happening is that unfortunately the developer is looking to start the programme in September of this year. What's just happened this week is that they've laid out the traffic management plan as part of the DCO to get permission to finally complete the construction of the solar farm. What we're having to do in the next 21 days is, in their traffic management proposal, they have not stated anything about cycling or walking on the Route 1 cycle path, where 160 HGV lorries are going to be using the Head Hill Road and the Cllr Road for a 2-year period. What we're trying to do is get a mitigation process in place where we can protect the residents of Graydon and Goodnestone, protect cyclists, protect walkers. And the mitigation is to try and get the developer to get a cycle path that goes through the development. Obviously, we've been trying to do this for the last 3 years, but now is a defining moment for us. We're trying to get people to get onto the planning website, the Swale planning website, to voice their concerns about the fact that in the traffic management proposal that the developer has produced, there is no requirement for cycling and walking. So hopefully that answers the point about trying to link up that specific route of trying to get from Faversham to Cllr. So hopefully that helps. The last thing I say to that is that it's a thing that's going to be happening in the next 6 months. The developer is sort of hell-bent on trying to get it in cycle development by September of this year. So it's just something to bear in mind. If we do get an opportunity to look at our website, solarcycleway.com, gives you a link in how you can actually voice your, we have a template next to there, manipulate how you want. And it just gives a voice for the people in Graydon, and hopefully the people of Faversham, in how they can get something out of the development that's actually happening.
Thanks, Brian. And there's a display across in 12 the marketplace about the campaign, isn't there? And what you do. So yeah, do take a look, because potentially improving the route from Faversham through to Cllr would be, I think, a real win for cyclists, and it would link in with the National Cycle Network. Hey, have we got other people wanting to come in? Cass, you introduce yourself.
I'm Cass, I'm a resident, and I run a cycling business, and I'm just doing active travel and cycling, and trying to get more people on bikes from the point of view as transporting themselves, rather than cycling as a sport, just cycling as transport. And something that strikes, I cycle my kids around to school in Faversham, and I saw that you have got small streets on there.
Yes.
And so I had one child at Ospringe, I've got a child now at Davington, and Davington particularly, that road going, like, if that could be a small street, and Waterloo in Ospringe, oh my God, the difference it would make. Definitely. And I know that what you were saying about levelling up, and people are so in the habit of a car, and for them to change that, that's a good thing. I get that. But I think if that, like, I'd like to know, I guess, what priority the school streets have in which schools, because at the moment, when sometimes we walk to school, sometimes we cycle, we're sat in, with big vans that go through that road at Darrington, sat behind a van. If we walk across, it's dangerous.
Yes.
Because we're like, oh God, quick, run. I've got a 4-year-old, so she's like, it's really hard. And the same with Waterloo, it's so car-centric. I'm just really passionate about school streets, so I suppose it's like, I'd like to know what the priority is and what would be, is it realistic that might happen?
If you'd asked me that question a year ago, I said, oh, it's difficult. the school street in Thanet has been pretty successful, although I think it's quite an easy one to do. The school street in Southbrook has been phenomenally successful and was initially proposed by people. So that is a really, really good example of how it's really, really worked. And it's not just about more people walking to school, but they are. It's also about community around the school. So I think that the results of this are really, I don't know if Richard has seen what's going on, but maybe a comment or not. But I think there is a feeling that the KCC that actually school streets really do work, and they're looking for more examples. So, but it's persuading. I mean, there's three components really. The school, does the school want to do it? There is a technical change to the law which is coming, which will enable you to have to monitor school streets using cameras rather than having to have physical barriers. So that local authorities will be able to use ANPR recognition software with cameras, so that you can stop people with cameras using cameras, rather than at the moment what happens is the school staff have to go and put barriers out, which is some schools. But at Southborough, they thought it was worth it, so they did it, and the results have been so brilliant. But actually, the staff are saying this is great because now I've talked to the parents at the school gate. So there is a big win there actually both ways. You also need to consider residents, because you need to somehow make sure that actually, if they need to get out of their house at 9:15 to go to the doctor's appointment or whatever for the time, so it doesn't always work in every place. And then you need to think about, is it a through route? Now, this road is a through road that for people getting from Orr into Faversham, but how much of an inconvenience would it be for those people to go via Bisenwood Road? Now, I don't know the answer to that, and how many people, but you're right, these exactly sort of difficult decisions which we need to take, because otherwise we never get out of this vicious circle we got into of more cars, therefore people are frightened to drive, therefore there's more cars, therefore there's more congestion and more pollution, and people don't, so we have to reverse the process.
Can I bring Adrian Oliver? Because he wanted to comment as well, I think.
School streets, brilliant idea, but they do take a lot of work. And people who are monitoring the closure take a lot of abuse. So you've got to have pretty broad shoulders to do it. However, there is money to do it now. So if Davington can be convinced to do it, I think that's got to be a parent's approach. If parents can get together and say, we would like this, then I think certainly a teacher in Davington would certainly listen to it, as long as he didn't have to apply his own resources to it. So it would have to be parent-led. It could be resident-led, because I'm sure the residents of Cllr Road would be delighted if there were so much traffic going through the streets at that time.
Yeah, and the residents usually they can have access, or do houses.
They have, the residents would have access. It depends.
You've got absolutely chock-a-block.
Yeah, it's not a building. It's a flexible arrangement. So people who need to get access can get access. People who need to get out can get out. That's why you have to have physical people there.
I'm just going to contradict you on the abuse thing, because sorry. But from Southbrook, they were really frightened about that. And I think there was a little bit to begin with, but now it is so popular that actually any level of abuse at the beginning has fallen away, because people can see all these children in the street, and all this the community work going on. And people say, yeah, of course, because that's how it should be, isn't it?
But yeah, I mean, it's change, isn't it? It's a glorious thing once it's adopted. But that first few times.
First few days.
It can be, and it's just that people doing that need to be aware that it's not going to be, and they're not going to be welcomed with open arms by everybody. But I would so encourage them to do that.
If people want to drive, it's just finding places where they can park, which they can park if it's safe, with that car park, isn't it? So giving people those options, that just how lovely it would be for kids to be able to scoot, cycle and walk and just cross that road, you know? Get to school.
I think Oxford is a different case, but one of the issues you can with Oxford is obviously it's an acre domain, so it's an air quality management area. And a lot of that is down to the fact that there are two junctions very close together on a very busy truck road. However, quite a lot of that traffic is school traffic. That's what's causing the problem. So if it could be done, I don't know, it's a bit, if it could be done, it would probably contribute significantly to mitigating current air quality problems.
Can I bring a couple of others? Because I think both people might be kind of residents of these areas. Nigel, do you want to come in there?
I actually live opposite the entrance to Faversham School. It leads all this week into the question. 20-mile-an-hour speed throughout the town. It's not been policed. And there's no mitigation. Certainly, Priory Road, it's like a racetrack. And not just when the school's on, doesn't really make any difference. As you pointed out. And I think managing the 20 mile an hour, making slow the traffic down, that would encourage more people to be more confident perhaps to go out on the road. Not be walking. I used to walk my dog from Hall. I used to hate that bit of road. Back to home because the speed of the traffic. And I used to count the cars. I would get maybe 2 that were doing this phase, which were maybe 20, maybe 30. The remainder, maybe 6 or 8 cars, would be doing well over 40, 50 miles an hour, and some more. So, and I looked at the survey that was done when we got the 2020 day, and Priory Road and Ostrich Road, Hall Road, the average was quite low. But what it didn't tell them was what the maximum was, and how many the maximum speeding.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of not a bigger thing.
And that's one of the roads been identified as being, we need to do more on that. So whether, yes, agreed.
I thought the other day, a simple thing, yellow lines, alternating yellow lines, yes. Cars park alternate, so you've got to sweep.
Yes, indeed. That's something you can do, alternate parking. That creates a sort of style effect and an uncertainty effect that people, absolutely people think, oh, I've got to go slow, because I simply can't. I would rather have to slalom a bit if cars are going at 20 than be faced with somebody coming at me at 50. I mean,
I think it's pretty bad.
It needs to be designed right. Yes, you need to. Yeah.
Can we go to Joy?
Oh, yeah, just a comment about the school. I walked down there with my dog the afternoon, and yes, regarding air quality, but in the winter people get to the school at about 2:30, despite the fact schools at 3:30, and sitting there with their engines going, people going. It's very, very conscious of that.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yes.
I mean, there are some notices there. It's very frustrating because I think the wardens, if they come out, they can go and talk to people who are running their car engines. If those people then turn them off, that's fine, and they can't do anything further. So obviously, immediately, people would turn their engines off. So it would be great if we could have stronger enforcement legislation.
I don't know how many of you know, I referenced Waltham Forest earlier, but they've done a really Holland scheme, so it's just trying to design the Waltham's their village as to how it might be designed in Denmark, in Holland. And they've really done three things. They've implemented 20 miles an hour on almost every road. They've put some cycling infrastructure on the most heavily used routes, on the main roads, and they've done low traffic neighbourhoods, so that you cannot drive through much of the residential streets in Waltham Forest. You always get in and get out, you just can't drive through. And on one street, name now escapes me, we stood outside this primary school, and you watch the children and you watch the parents congregating, rather like in Southborough, children coming out of school, ignore the parents going straight across the road into the park, because they can, because there's no cars going in and out there. There were 3,000 cars a day going on that road before, but because of what they've done, so you can't actually use it as a cut through anymore. Now children can actually play, and mums and dads can talk to each other outside the school, and it's just magnificent what they've done there.
There's a couple of things that come up for me as a regular cyclist about how it is, first of all, the general state of the roads is pretty terrible, and I'm thinking in particular around the Tesco's, that bit of road there. And it makes you swerve out to avoid potholes and bits of repaired road that's crumbling and falling apart. So I feel like that, and so much of the sort of the gutter, obviously you're not supposed to be cycling in the gutter, but there are times when you do sort of get that close. It's dangerous, and there's so much of it I couldn't, tell you now. And another one for me is that ridiculous cycle path on Bisingwood Road, which you've already mentioned. I mean, I've seen some pretty vicious arguments on Facebook about it. The drivers saying, you shouldn't be on the road, you should use the cycle path. Well, of course, you don't have to use the cycle path, you can cycle in the road. That cycle path, I think, is more dangerous being as it is, and I would almost like to see it being done away with and the road widened. Because, even though you have the priority at the junctions now, there's no way you can't stop and check. You have to stop and check, because people won't know that anyway. And it's also in a bit of a state, and pedestrians walk all over it, and. So, yeah, it's...
Well, that road actually is plenty wide enough to do a proper in segregated lane there. And I think probably, if we want to bid for bigger schemes, I think I'd probably bid for that one.
Yeah.
Because, and I think it's quite a lot of cyclists there, and so personally, if we want to put a big scheme in, I think maybe we do that and do it properly.
Yeah.
To the new design standards.
And it gets all broken up around Sainsbury's, and you don't know where to go. Yeah, it's dangerous.
Come in.
Yes, Swanee Jackson, a resident. I've been for as well, and I hate Abington Road too. So. Those priorities. Can we just have a look at that slide again?
Slide 98. I think.
So, could you just explain what part in the scheme of those priorities are they the things that you're going to bid for?
What's that? It's near the end. Yeah.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Coming in.
About triple. There we are. Right. So this one which looks like it's yellow, but actually green.
Okay.
These schemes are ones which are we have designs for.
You have this right.
And we've probably got funding for, or nearly, and could be doable within the next year or two.
Because I mean, there's nothing there about this. I was looking very quickly. There's no segregate. There's no plans at the moment, is there, for segregated?
Okay, so this was done when did we do this? In sort of August, the priorities were set in August?
Later, it would have been, yeah.
Maybe
It was signed off in January, February, so it would have been.
So it was trying to find those things which could actually, these were the things which are funded by the town council or by borough council or by KCC or by developers, basically what that list is.
Right.
If you go to the next slide, these were the ones which we put together as a package to submit to the DFT for the Active Travel Fund 3, which we didn't get. So we put these things, these were the sorts of schemes we thought were a priority, could be delivered by KCC within the year, because you have to spend the money within a year or 18 months. So it's sort of a bit of resource management needed. So those were the sorts of schemes which we put into tranche 3. We go to
So are you saying are we saying that wasn't ambitious? Is that
that may not have been ambitious enough.
Right, I've got it, yes.
So I
I
haven't got priorities 3 and 4. If you could just go up 2 slides. This, oh no, sorry, I haven't gone. The Bisingwood Road one was either orange or red. I think it was orange, I think. Simply because it's a lot of money to do that. Is it a mile?
It's less than, yeah.
So if that had been a priority,
Maybe that might have got funded. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's our mistake. You know, maybe we should have put that down as a.
Got to dream big.
Yeah, well, precisely.
Exactly.
But we were given an example of good ones. You say you were saying that we didn't get specific feedback about what was wrong. I think it's just funny because it's like teaching. You're not supposed to give specific feedback. You just show them what a good one looks like, and they go, oh yes, of course I realise now. No, they don't. They say what was specific, but. I mean, is it not possible to look at what those good ones were and say, well, yeah, but we haven't got that sort of thing?
So there's a couple of things really. One is that we were trying to think about making sure that we benefited lots of different parts of town.
Yeah.
That we were supporting the 20 miles an hour scheme. We were answering what we wanted, which was about crossings predominantly, and making junctions better and those sorts of things. So we had lots of different criteria pulling us in different directions. And I think it was just felt that the Bisingwood Road cycleway wasn't particularly high on people's priorities. It's a lot of money relatively for one piece of infrastructure. But maybe it's the sort of thing which we should include for transport, because in a way it's an easy thing for the DFT to fund. Oh yes, we can see it's going from Sainsbury's to almost the centre of town. We can generate more X number more cyclists along if it's done properly. Let's do it.
I think there's a real tension between what is probably the right thing for the town, because as Adrian said, we wanted to reinforce the 20 mile an hour speed, because people have been saying tonight. Needs reinforcing. And we also wanted to do things that we knew would have popular support, and being able to cross the road safely is massively popular, where the Bisingwood cycleway, I mean, you get lots of people complaining for all kinds of reasons about it. So I think on a certain level we weren't being brave enough, but we were trying to do the right thing for the town, and it may be now that we need to forget about exactly the right thing for the town and think about what can we get the money for, and let's do that. But you want to be careful about that, don't you? Because you don't want to start doing things just for the money. They do need to be things that we as a local community want. So there's a balance to be struck. Adrian, did you want to comment on that? Adrian will probably be, for his sins, probably be overseeing the swale input, which we will feed into when it goes on.
It's interesting about people saying that we're brave, and actually what Active Travel England are asking us to be is actually to be bold. And I think we've got to start distinguishing where we're getting money from. So a crossing is actually quite small amounts of money, and I think we should be looking at KCC to fund that sort of activity. I think we should be talking to the DFT about funding ambitious schemes. And my fear with Bising Wood is actually it hasn't got connectivity. It takes you down Bising Wood Road, but it doesn't really connect you with anything.
It's National Cycle Route 1.
Yeah, come on, it
You can't be more connected than that.
you into town.
It takes you from Dover to Edinburgh.
Send it to Signal Sound.
And I'm the man who says National Cycle Route 1 through Swell is a complete embarrassment.
Well, it
It is. I won't cycle to Gravely because it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
And I want to.
And that's why we need the solar cycleway.
So cycling
And that private way, yeah.
in a angry moment I had with fellow Adrian here. Yeah, I was being angry. I was being angry. I mean, because in the state of National Cycle Network, I was on the cusp of asking Sustrans to move from the network.
Well,
Because
don't blame me.
it's just
It is appalling.
appalling on so many levels. But he can't be now. He talked to me now.
Just an idea, and I don't want to be sort of full of good ideas all the time, but we've got two crossings of the rail, which is basically the Love Lane Bridge and the bridge under. But there's two footbridges, the one from the Wreck and the one from Preston Church. I mean, it would be very cheap to put in wheel gutters. So you can just push your bike up onto the top.
Yeah,
Like ride it across the
that's a good idea.
and a wheel gutter down at the other end, so you've got people and cyclists and pedestrians off the roads, and it'd be much quicker to go from Preston into town over that route than
Yeah,
bike, it would be to go all the way around. And similarly for all those people that are to the west of Love Lane, they could go over the Wreck Bridge.
Google took me to one of those bridges with steps. And I found, look, because I've got an e-bike, there's no way I was even going to be able to get that up the steps. Yeah, that was
But in
really
London, you
frustrating.
can see they have a gutter up the side.
It's a great idea. Yeah.
Network rail, isn't it?
They own the
Network rail.
That's what
Yeah,
it is.
because the Preston footbridge changed to the Faversham strip massive extent. And it disappeared.
But it's just a gutter, you know, it's a gutter, no
Yes,
extra
there's in
infrastructure.
Canterbury.
You just push it on, off you go.
Good idea. Good idea. I think we're starting to run out of time. Thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you for the contributions. To remind you, we are consulting on the plan, so please visit the Town Council website, have a look at the detailed plan, and if you've got comments, do respond to the consultation. And I mean, the final thing I was going to say is that everything we've talked about and we've done in the last 3 years since we had the last elections is really on the back of community campaigning, because as Adrian said at the beginning, it was people, you know, members of the local community campaigning for a 20-mile-an-hour limit, which is where this started. And a lot of what we're talking about now is not about the town council, it's about all of us as citizens engaging with our fellow citizens and encouraging people to cycle, getting them to feedback about what isn't safe and so on. So, you know, I hope go away and think, well, how can I help, you know, build this momentum? Because there's a real need to build momentum. I think we did a 25% decrease in people using their cars by 2030. That is very, very challenging, and that's the policy. That's national government policy. It's not radical, you know, left wing, whatever green kind of policies. It's what the government wants to achieve.
Just correct you. It's not government policy to reduce traffic by 25%. The government target is to reduce carbon by 25%, 30% by 2030. But the only way we're going to do that is if we reduce traffic. So the DfT doesn't say it, but that's you have to read between the lines and join the dots, and that's what it means.
Right. Okay.
And so any feedback, I hope you found this useful. If any feedback, please, you know, just complain to Julian.
And in fact, me and Eddie Thomas, the chair of our active travel, we're going to be in 12 Marketplace tomorrow morning. So if you've got immediate feedback.
All I do is
When's the consultation finish? When's that on?
We're going to run it, I think, until the end of August. So there's plenty of time to respond.
And please do do go on the Cllr Cycleway website and make comments about the importance of getting cycling, because that is needed as part of our parish to town, and linking up with Whitstable, because actually that will, in the long term, be a really important strategic route.
Just a lady that I was speaking to this evening come up with a wonderful idea. She said about making the route key to key, so from Faversham Quay to Whitstable Quay.
Okay.
And sort of having
Key to key.
outside the box that way.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for your involvement, and look forward to